Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service podcast. Today, I'm joined by Frankie Dillon, who is our Violence and Aggression Lead, and also by Mark Cochrane. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Sean.
We're here today to talk about an issue that has been ongoing for many, many, many years, and we're still having to deal with it in some shape or form. And politicians, it's got loads of media coverage. Politicians have condemned it, local community workers have condemned it, but still it's with us. And that's violence against our staff. And I'm sitting here wondering, after all these years, what's the current situation, Frankie, with it?
Well, I think nationally, first of all, John, we've had quite a piece of media coverage from April. Unfortunately, we hit a figure of 22,000 assaults on ambulance staff in the year 24-25, which equates to 14 assaults an hour.
Now, when you say 22,000, Frankie, that's nationally.
Yes. What that equated to for us was 570 assaults. We actually, the national trend last year was an increase. We've seen a slight dip, but unfortunately in the first quarter of this year, we're seeing our figures rise again to our peak. We're heading towards our peak again of about 740 assaults and incidences of abuse against our staff. Reported assaults.
So what have you been doing reported assaults?
Well, we work off our own reporting system, Datex, and we would, again, using national figures, we would estimate that there's at least a 30% underreporting trend among staff. Staff either don't have the time or the apathy of it's part of the job will cause people not to report. So we still feel that we're not reaching a true figure or a true picture of the extent of the behaviour of the public towards our staff.
That's startling that staff don't report these, So what, in terms of the assaults against staff, what are they like? Are they all just verbal assaults? Is it just a bit of abuse down the line, or what is it?
John, it goes from grievous bodily harm. It goes from staff being threatened with knives, with weapons, being assaulted with weapons. We're seeing a prevalence in sexual assault against both our male and female staff. And yes, the level of verbal abuse which our control room staff face is staggering. It's right across the board.
I think, John, there's another point there you mentioned about why staff won't report. Staff live within their communities that they work in, and there can be a little bit of pressure in there. They feel that there's perhaps a bit of pressure in there not to report because they will encounter the individuals who have subjected them to attacks, and if they'll encounter them on a daily basis.
Well, have we any evidence of that, Mark? Because when you say they live in the community, I'd have seen that as a very positive thing, because don't the community gather around them? Don't the community support them at all times?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And of course, our staff living and working in the community want to do the best for their community. But there are certain places that staff will live and communities that they live within where there is a level of intimidation, and they feel that, rightly or wrongly, they feel that. And I've had staff who've said to me, I would love to report this, but for example, I meet the individual who assaulted me every morning walking his dog, and I don't want to take that chance.
I do remember years ago, Mark, there was this feeling sometimes about even the isolation of our stations at night time.
Yeah.
That staff were vulnerable there if somebody decided to come looking for them.
Well, of course, staff being in stations now is a unique occasion. They're not often there. They're always out and working. But some of the locations, we do everything we can to protect stations, and Frankie in particular has been very proactive in putting measures in place. So we have CCTV within stations as well, and security measures there. But there will always be occasions when staff will be on their own as a crew in certain locations. And generally, the majority of our assaults will not take place in those locations. It's when they're out trying to do their job, trying to help the people who have asked for their help.
Yeah. Well, Frankie, you did talk about some of the types of assaults, the grievous bodily harm. What's the crack with that? Like, that's
we have had staff hospitalised, not on a regular basis, but one is one too many. We've had staff had to come off the road because of the nature of the physical assault, never mind the psychological aspects of being assaulted whilst on duty. Our staff are healthcare professionals. We shouldn't be training them to have to deal with these situations. And something that has really struck me, the public street is one thing, but the back of an ambulance is a very scary, lonely place when you're on your own with a violent or aggressive person. And it does have its impact.
Yeah, in a very small, confined space where once you're in that situation, if it hasn't been sort of preempted or you haven't had any sort of cause for concern, it can be very difficult to extract yourself from that in a moving vehicle, often at quite significant speeds. So yeah, a very scary place to be on your own.
Yeah, and you did pick up, Mark, after Frankie's saying, and Frankie did mention it, but it's not just out on the road, it's our control staff.
Absolutely not. Control staff are subjected to verbal aggression.
But why would that be? Because you would think, to be perfectly honest with you, somebody phoning in to call 999, that their main concern is about getting some help.
Yeah.
Where do they cross the line into giving staff?
And I know you don't mean it when you ask your question like that, but why would that be? So let's deal with that. So there's absolutely no excuse for any behaviour of this nature, whether it's verbal, physical, sexual, intimidation, whatever it is. There's no excuse for any of that. But these are fairly, I suppose, stressed out situations for people when they're phoning for an ambulance. And we have seen evidence as well of people who have subjected our control room staff to verbal aggression because of the delay in getting an ambulance. And that can be very difficult for the public to understand. Why is it taking so long? Where's the ambulance? The expectation would be phone 3 9s and the ambulance will come immediately. That's not the reality of the modern day health service. We get to the sickest quickest and we try to get there as quickly as we can. But there are lots of pressures in there which contribute to delays. So let's be honest about it. We have seen an increase in our response times over recent months and years, and that has contributed to that heightened sense of
Mark. I agree in that. I think the staff understand and have an expectation of a certain amount of frustration, but when it comes down to threats to kill, sectarian abuse, racist abuse, assuming the person
is
at
that
the
the
other
stuff
end
that
of the
comes down the line as well
on a daily basis
when they're not face to face, they can't see any of this.
Absolutely,
sometimes
on a daily basis, threatening their jobs, threatening to report them. It goes beyond frustration at the lack of service. It verges on the criminal, and at times it is the criminal, and we do report these people to the police.
Yeah. And we have control room staff who will get that not just once a day, but multiple times a day, and that's all going home with those folk at the end of the day.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you. Okay, you talk about the ambulance service, and everybody sees the big yellow ambulances flying up and down the road and assume that's the ambulance service. And we'll talk in a minute or two about how the frontline staff deal with these assaults. But how can the control staff deal with, for example, can they hang up?
There is within legislation, once we get to a certain point, we can disconnect the call, but we have to be mindful as well that at the other end of that call could be a patient in a life-threatening situation who needs our help. So our modus operandi, if you like, is that we will always do the best we can for our patients. So that will involve prolonging phone calls, which ordinarily, if you had that conversation out on the street with someone, you would just walk away from it immediately.
Well, you see, that's my point. They walk away, but our staff can't. Doesn't that speak volumes of them?
It speaks volumes of their dedication, that they are prepared to subject themselves to that day in, day out. It takes its toll. You asked what systems we have in place. Even on just on a call-by-call basis, staff, once they're subjected to that, can step away from the desk for a period of time, but that then depletes our service downstairs. That prevents us from answering the next call coming in as quickly as we can. And some of the folk listening to this today will have seen our video a number of years ago where we reenacted a scenario and we embarked on our Stop the Abuse Now campaign. And you'll see how that operates from the point of contact with the caller right through to the crew being assaulted, right through then to that control officer starting to take another call.
So every single assault, like from where I'm sitting, it has an impact. It really does have an impact, and you sit and wonder about our staff, how they keep going at it. So this brings me very nicely. I want you to listen to two of our frontline staff who have just recently been at the wrong end of these assaults, and then we'll have a listen to what they got to say, and then we'll talk a wee bit wider about the impact it has.
So we got a Category 1 call in the city of Belfast for a unconscious male.
Right, Category 1 is immediately life-threatening
yeah.
assaults.
So we're talking the cardiac arrest, anaphylaxis, but with this one, this was believed to be an overdose. So we weren't 100% sure. It was members of the public that had called it in. There was a warning placed on the call that he had already been sort of regressive to them, but we knew that police at the time weren't attending to this call. He was clearly under the influence of heroin, which would be his go-to drug of choice. So he was a wee bit groggy, sleepy, and just because there were so many people around, myself and my crewmate made the decision that it would be nicer for him to be assessed in the back of the vehicle so he didn't have prying eyes of the general public looking at him. He was quite wobbly and off his feet, so we were assisting him onto the trolley. And at this point, he was pretty compliant, if not really knowing what was going on. Once onto the stretcher, though, he certainly woke up a lot more and then started becoming verbally abusive. When we tried to settle him down, he then actually tried to punch me. The only reason he didn't make contact with me is because I actually stepped back and then came up against a wall. So if he wanted to jump off the stretcher at that time, if he wasn't strapped in, he certainly would have been able to corner me into the wall.
And where was the punch aimed?
At my face. That was the closest point at him as well, at the time. So it was very much a quick reaction of moving backwards for him not to make contact. But unfortunately, he actually then did spit deliberately into my other crewmate's face. This caused a big issue. As being an IV drug user, you automatically think, could he have a bloodborne disease or some sort of disease that he could contract? And obviously my crewmate had a young child, and that was his concern at this point, was that he's now been put at risk because of what has happened. But it wasn't even that we reported it because we wanted him to go down. It was to protect the other staff from coming to him. A previous incident that was quite significant verbal abuse, I reported to the police and it was dealt with really quickly. And although they said that he wouldn't get a prison sentence, I said to them, that's not actually what I want. I just want a flag on his name. And if he gets multiple of them, then there's a big issue. And I have been told that his name has been flagged. And when his name comes up in his records, his criminal record, it does say verbally abusive to ambulance staff. Yeah. So it stays on people's records, even if they think that it's just minor words that wouldn't really affect anyone physically. There's a saying of sticks and stones may break my bones and all that kind of thing. But actually, after a while, this abuse, it gets really on top of you. And it's just really not nice to hear. And it shouldn't be justified. Some of the words that they say to me directed at me, I feel disgusting, I feel dirty. But then I'm angry. And I feel like I have to try and control my emotions and what their words are saying to me, because if I antagonize it, then it will basically just make the situation worse. And I try not to take what they say on board. I'm normally quite resilient in it, which is why I'm happy to talk about it, because I feel like people need to be aware of the stuff that does go on inside that ambulance.
I've only been in the job about 1.5 years as a paramedic, but I've had quite a few incidents. I had a guy who was particularly verbally abusive of a sexual nature when we were treating him, and that was quite difficult. We were bringing him from another hospital to another hospital, and he was in the custody of the police. It all started really when he wanted to go to the toilet, and I had to explain to him, look, we're only a few minutes from the hospital, could you hold on? And he just didn't seem to accept that. And then he went to expose himself as well until the police officer stepped in and stopped that. And I think that's really where it all started. He started kicking off, hitting the ambulance, hitting the interior walls and hitting the defibrillator as well. And then he started on me. Initially I was sitting beside him in the chair, and then he started calling me all the names of the day. So I didn't really entertain it. I just said, I'm not here to tolerate this. But he kept going. And then I moved behind him into the captain's chair so he wouldn't see me. And then he proceeded to turn around and call me a lot of names of a sexual nature. Obviously, I don't think I can say on camera what they were. But they were quite offensive.
How did you feel in the back of the ambulance as he was going through his tirade?
Scared, particularly as a younger female in the job. It is scary, especially when you get called names of a sexual nature. Especially, there's a police officer sitting there as well, so I didn't feel overly threatened. but it just wasn't a nice experience.
But you're in a very vulnerable situation
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
back of that ambulance. You know, it's a
Yeah.
very confined space.
It is,
And the
yeah.
fact that as a police officer was there was maybe a blessing, actually.
It was, because he could have been 10 times, he probably would have been 10 times worse as well if there wasn't a police officer presence. I know sometimes it's easier said than done just to forget about it, but it does stick with you. You just have to calm yourself, chat with your crewmate about it, and just try and pick yourself up and move on to the next call. You know, it's not like I just forget about it when I go home. It still stays with me. And it can be quite difficult to just clear your mind and get on with it. I've also been physically trapped in someone's house before. I walked up the stairs, made eye contact with the patient. I just got like an off feeling about them. So I went to go down the stairs, and as I was doing that, I heard my colleague run behind me. So I just started running. I didn't know why we were running. I was presuming it was because he was chasing us, and he was chasing us. And me and my crewmate split just because of the way he was running, and he trapped me against a wall, and I was unable to get out of his house for about a good 5-10 minutes. He just kind of stood in front of me, and it was about me trying to de-escalate with him and work with him and Rosie as well to try and, you know, get this guy, bring him around to a sense of, let's just step back, calm down. And he eventually did just start running off somewhere else in the house, which meant it was our opportunity to get out of the house. And then we went into the ambulance, locked the doors, radio control for police as an emergency.
And you have a connection in the ambulance service?
I do.
What was his view when you told him this story?
So I think my dad had put his dad head on rather than his job head on, and he was just concerned for my own safety. And it's scary for him thinking that his daughter is going out to these incidents where, you know, you mightn't have immediate police support, or you mightn't be able to deal with a patient who may then cause harm to you. And it worries him as a dad. I think when you go to these incidents, it's thinking, you know, is it really worth being put in these positions where you could be, you know, receive verbal abuse from someone, or even be assaulted by someone? You know, when you are just going out there to help them, that's as simple as it is, just to help them. And it does make you think, like, would it be much easier going into an office job where you're not facing these people who are unpredictable? But when you get the one person who is thankful, you know, it really does make a difference, to actually feel like you are doing something worthwhile and positive.
Okay, so Frankie, can I ask you, what are your thoughts on hearing those two testimonies?
I mean, it really does put context into what we're told. We can talk facts, figures, you know, situations, John, but when you hear it firsthand from two of our staff, what they're encountering on a day-to-day basis, well, number one, it frustrates and angers me that they have to meet members of the public who feel the need to treat them in such manner. The points that come out of it, first of all, it's two young female members of staff, and the demographic of our staff has changed greatly over the last years. The days of the ambulance man, and I think that's something that, you know, it was a title that we give the staff, has long gone. You know, our staff are now recruited through an academic route, coming to us with a degree in paramedicine. Fantastic achievement for every boy and girl who comes to us, but we're seeing a change in our demographic. They're young, they're coming from a university background, and all of a sudden they're having to face the challenges which society are bringing to us. Society are challenging us as more senior members of the community, but for these boys and girls to have to face these challenges, as Rosie said on her first call, Alice going to support a vulnerable member of the community to be unlawfully imprisoned, and we have to use that term, that it's a criminal act, and she's not the first person this year to have been subjected to that behaviour.
And with all that behaviour that came their way, the one thing that struck me was, as I said to both of them, is that they showed care and compassion for the first guy to get him out of public view, give him his respect, and they treat everybody with that. When you go there, every member of our staff will do that, but then turns on them. As I said, most members of the public would walk away at that point.
They never cease to amaze me, John, in their resilience and their ability to see through the abhorrent behaviour, sometimes the criminal behaviour of the service user, and still try to treat that person with care,
And
and
they
continue to do that.
They're a credit to they're a credit to the organisation, but mostly I think they're a credit to themselves.
Yeah.
And Mark,
and what came across very clearly, and what both Rosie and Alice said, was that duty of care that they feel, and that goes back to what we said about our control room staff. And you asked me about why would people stay on the phone and listen to this abuse. Yes, there is a legislative requirement there as well, but there comes a point where you take no more and we can move on. But Rosie and Alice both kind of explained it very well. You know, they want to do their best for their patient, but there's also then other public that they want to make sure are safe as well.
Yeah.
And I think that is exemplified here in what these two guys are saying. But that's the same for all of our teams. And but I wanted to say and make it very clear to anybody listening to this, we do not have to take this.
No, we absolutely don't.
And we can walk away from this, and that's part of our training, but these guys will go above and beyond.
And one thing that I've always wondered, I think another member of staff, Andrea, in the West, suffered a horrific assault.
Absolutely.
And it was in the middle of the night. And I often wondered the impact it has on the staff. But if you were the partner of a member of staff who had been assaulted and they came knocking the door at 3 o'clock in the morning to get in, and they've been obviously physically assaulted and their tears and their blood could be anywhere, I often wonder, how would that make a parent or a partner feel? And that's very relevant in this case, Mark, because you are Molly's father. How did you feel? Alice's father. Sorry, I said Molly. Right?
Forgive me, I get her name wrong.
Well, should maybe not forgive me. But you're an assistant director of operations of the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service. You speak regularly. You're the face of the campaign against violence. But when it comes to your own door, where does that leave you with your professional feelings and your personal feelings?
Well, it certainly puts a different spin on it. But I would caveat that by saying every time I hear of these assaults, and Frankie keeps me updated on a regular basis, it makes me feel the same way, angry, but this is a slightly different level when it is your own daughter. Obviously, I've heard this before. I heard it on the night when it happened, and I was contacted as a daddy as opposed to an assistant director of operations. And I think your first reaction is pure, first of all, are you safe? Are you well? What can I do? But then there's that anger, and that, it's more than frustration. It is anger that someone has subjected someone and love to this type of behaviour when they've been trying to do their best for that patient. And what we try to do in the organisation now, John, is that it used to be we stood people down and we sent them home. We try not to do that now, because the impact that must have on families, not just at the moment.
So what do we do then? Because that was going to be my next question. Immediately after that event, what do we as an ambulance service do? So
the focus for us will be support for the individuals that have been subjected to whatever the abuse or the violence is. And whether that includes an immediate debrief from a manager who's on duty or on call, or it includes peer support at a later time when staff have had time just to process what has happened to them, or indeed requires support to give statements to police immediately to try and bring a prosecution. We will very much be guided by the member of staff, but we think it's more important that staff would stay in an area and in a place where they have that network around them, people who understand what has just happened, who understand their role, and they're not going home to wake in the house. Because you can imagine if it comes to, you come home to your house and you wake in the whole house up at that time in the morning, nobody's going to sleep anyway.
But do we insist that they stay, or?
No, that depends on the member of staff, very much what the member of staff wants to do. We'll be guided by them, but our primary focus would be support as much as we can.
So immediately in the middle of the night then that support comes from the managers, but the following day, what do we just forget about it and let them go about their business?
Absolutely not. And this gentleman sitting to the side of me is very, very proactive in that respect, and we've been lucky to secure resources to allow us to have Frankie, and Frankie will follow up every one of these personally. We'll have other managers in the organisation. These incidents are talked about every morning on our operational huddle. So every operational manager who's on that day will know that a member of staff has been assaulted, and there'll be personal contact made, follow up to see how they are, what additional support they may need, what else we can do for them, what do they want to do themselves. Because unfortunately, as an organisation, we can't bring a prosecution. We have to, the individual member staff has to report it. We will support them through that process.
So if we can't bring the prosecution, what then practical support do we give them?
So the member of staff will be supported to give statements to the police. They'll be supported then in any subsequent follow-up the police have by providing information, video evidence, anything that we may have that will aid that prosecution. And then if it gets to court, and when it gets to court, we will go along with them as well and support them.
Yeah, I said of the legislative process, is there other support that we give them?
Our peer support network is in place. And I say that's not immediate because it takes a little time to process what's happened. So it's not at the point of the incident. But peer support will contact all of these individuals and offer them whatever support they need.
And obviously,
and that includes things like counselling, because I don't know about you, John, you've been operational as well. And do you remember the first time you were assaulted? I certainly remember the first time I was assaulted.
But those are the sort of things that you never forget. But in those days, there was a difference. There was nearly an acceptance of it, and I know it's not acceptable. You know,
and it goes back maybe to what Frankie said about our workforce at that time was predominantly male, and it was seen to be, you take that, you take it on the chin, and you carry on. But that's not right. And I was one of those individuals way back then when that was the attitude, and you went back to station and you talked with your fellow crewmates or whatever, and you laughed it off and you put it away for the shift and you carried on with your business.
Yeah, and that was the thing.
But the important point here is I still remember that 30 odd years ago, the first time I got a slap in the face.
Yeah.
And that has never left me. And for some of our staff now who are joining us at 21, 22 years of age, straight out of university, they don't have that life experience just yet. They're still accumulating that. But I can retire legally, I feel like, when I'm 67, but some of these staff may have to work a lot longer than that. Yeah. And that's a real big concern for us as an organisation.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking back to you saying the support that we would have got in those days was from your crewmate immediately, there and then, and then back into the station, where the boys would have maybe made light of it and eased your burden in some shape or form. And that was our support then. But you used the term peer support. Now, we know what it is. But members of the public listening to it,
fair point.
What is peer support?
So we have a group of staff whose only role in the organisation is to provide operational staff, non-operational staff with additional levels of support when they're subjected to particularly traumatic events or assaults that we've been talking about today. That will include listening to them, understanding what they would like by way of follow-up, and also signposting them towards services which may be able to support them further, such as counselling services. We've had staff who've been subjected to particularly horrific incidents where they've then entered into, multiple sessions of counselling to try and allow them to process this to a point where they can return to work. Many of our staff will be assaulted. They'll take a couple of hours break. They'll get themselves a cup of tea, a bit of downtime, and they'll go again. But some of our staff aren't able to do that. Not least due to the injuries they've sustained, but to the psychological impact that's had on them.
And we'd be leaving people in no doubt that this organisation would pursue prosecutions where possible. Very, very quickly we would like to pursue the prosecutions. And I'm going to come back to you and to you, Frankie, about the legislative process as it is at the minute. But just before we move on to that, we've talked about the impact on the staff. Is there an impact on the community?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a no-brainer. If we have to take staff off the road, if they're unable to continue with their shift, then immediately that's an ambulance that's not available to respond at that particular time. That particular short absence at that stage can lead into prolonged absence. And in some cases, we've had staff who have been off work for multiple weeks and even months as a result of this. And I would suggest as well, staff who have been unable to return to their work. as a result of some of these incidents.
Yeah.
And that's not just in Northern Ireland here for the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service. That's right across the UK and with our colleagues in the National Ambulance Service as well.
Yeah,
they all see this same behaviour.
And the funny thing about that cycle is that if an ambulance is taken off the road that's serving a particular community, if it's not there, what's going to happen are delays in response.
Yeah.
And what can that trigger? That can trigger more abuse.
It's that vicious circle, and it goes even beyond that, because as I mentioned, a lot of our recruitment now at paramedic level is through universities. And bringing it back to me as a parent and looking at other parents who would really encourage their children to join an organisation where abuse or assault is at such a level or deemed by the public to be acceptable, who would encourage staff to do that? You know, we want to encourage people to work for what I believe is the best organisation in the world.
But I know that you would encourage, and you have encouraged your own child to do it. And listening to the two girls in a longer interview than we just showed there, they love this job.
Absolutely.
You know, the good outweighs the bad. But the public don't get to see the good. The public, and unless it's in their house, but they'll hear on the news that staff were assaulted today, staff were assaulted yesterday, and they'll sit and go, "What's going on there?"
Yeah, there's an absolute passion amongst our staff to do the best.
We're lucky to have that.
Well, absolutely, and it sort of encourages people like me getting towards their end of their career to keep going for those staff and to do the best that we can, and to go that extra mile as much as we possibly can, to seek the investment we need for various things that we know will help as well. Yeah. But it takes its toll. And young people like this, in their early 20s, in our control rooms, being subjected to maybe 2 or 3 verbal assaults a day, like, how much can you really take of that before? And it sneaks up on you without you even knowing. And I talked about my first incident there. And as I was talking about that, I was thinking to myself, have I really ever dealt with that? Because, and that sounds a bit corny, and people might see that as corny, but it's still there. And there's a lot of memories that I don't have from those days, which are more positive, but you keep the negative ones.
Yeah, and you're talking a lot there, Mark, about the things that we do and the things that we, this is a journey that we're on to support our staff, and we look to improve that. But Stop the Abuse Now is the campaign. What we do is helping staff afterwards and trying to inform the public. But Frankie, why are people not getting jail time for assaulting staff?
People are getting jail time, John, and that's.
But the staff see that. But the staff believe that.
Yeah, well, we try to let the staff know as often as. Perfect example. That assault on Rosie and her crewmate, that person's in jail. He's serving a 4-month sentence. We are one thing I would say is that we see across the board support from the judicial system. Once a case goes before, generally the magistrates at the minute, if we get legislative changes, it could be the Crown Courts. We're averaging, and just when I said 4 months, we're averaging a sentence of 4 months imprisonment for assaulting an ambulance worker. But that's going from a medium of maybe community service in some cases, actually to 10 months. Our district magistrate in Derry City recently convicted an individual for 2 assaults and criminal damage to our vehicle, and he gave a consecutive sentence, which was unheard of, and I found was there to put a message out, particularly in Derry. Because he does look after the people of the city, that this isn't to be tolerated. Yeah,
but I sort of wonder sometimes, or have in the past, but myself, would staff bother reporting these incidents because they have seen them? We've seen them down through the years, and I'm glad that there's an upsurge in the number of actual convictions and people doing time. You don't want to see anybody going to jail.
No.
But we don't want to see our staff assaulted. But what I'm wondering, in the years gone by, was it sort of, well, it's his word against mine, there's no particular evidence. Can we improve that?
Well, we have done, John. We've introduced a body-worn video project, sadly, that we have had to put body-worn video cameras into the access of our frontline staff, but we have. People often say to me it was a sad day for paramedicine and pre-hospital care. It's not. It's an indictment on our society that we have had to equip our staff with these cameras. The cameras record audio and video. They record the point of view of the staff member. To date, we have supported 36 prosecutions against various service users, mostly for physical assaults, but also for criminal damage to our vehicles.
On what period of time would that be with those 36 convictions?
Those 36 prosecutions are with projects up and running 2.5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So our staff were, and there is a reluctance. There was initially a reluctance. They don't want to be recording people for assaults. They want to be looking after patients, but an acceptance has come that these cameras are enabler and assistance. One
An assistance to what?
Well, as you said, my word against theirs, that's gone. When you have point of view video and audio evidence of the behaviour of the patient or the family member towards the staff, it's pretty hard to argue that in a court. And in fact, it has never been argued in court to this date. What we find is that when we do produce audio video evidence of a person's behaviour, that they are taking the opportunity to plead guilty at the earliest stage, so saving our staff having to go to court.
So you're saying, Frankie, that if staff are wearing body-worn cameras and they're assaulted and that's given to the defence solicitor, they're putting their hands up straight away?
That has certainly been my experience, John.
But it's not a really positive thing, isn't it?
Oh, well, it's positive, yes, in that it saves time. Again, that's abstraction time for a valued member of staff who should be on the road to be sitting in a courtroom. So it takes that away. It also saves that person, that member of staff, from the experience of going to court. And again,
which would be drawn out normally.
Yes, we're healthcare professionals. We're not meant to be in court. We're meant to be out there.
And often the going back to court, you're just reliving the incident and you're re-traumatizing.
Absolutely. Okay, listen here. I found that myself very informative, and I hope you got something out of it as well. But Mark, you got anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I suppose the first thing I want to acknowledge again, if it hasn't come across, and is the dedication and the passion of our staff. Where, to be honest, they stay, that extra few minutes that they maybe don't need to stay and could end up being assaulted. And that's not because of any negligence on their part. That's out of a desire to help. And that's the really important thing. We never go anywhere that we're not asked to go. We always get an invitation through a call. So we're invited in, if you like, and then we're subjected to this sort of behaviour. So I would just appeal to the public and to those that are listening to this, and particularly those people who maybe have a position of influence within our communities, to do all that you can to support these guys and girls when they're out there, when they're working in our control rooms, when you need to interact with us. The vast majority of people behave entirely appropriately, and I think that's important to acknowledge. This is a minority of people that engage in this behaviour, but it has a huge impact on us. All our staff are ordinary people doing an extraordinary job. They're subjected to behaviour that no one would tolerate anywhere else, certainly not in your own private life. So anything you can do, and don't just simply say that, that's not acceptable, that's not good. Try and do something positive. Things like, for example, our video is still out there. You can log onto that, like it, share it, promote it as much as possible. But if you're aware of this type of behaviour, or have seen it, or hear of it, or whatever, then we would appreciate your support by being proactive in that, not just paying lip service to it being unacceptable.
Right, so thanks very much for coming in, guys.
Thank you, John. And you never did tell us when was your first assault.
I can't remember what happened last week, Mark. So that's the end of this episode of our podcast. We hope you'll join us for future ones, and that they will be as interesting and engaging as the two guys, Frankie and Mark. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.